Welcome to the Louie file. You know, Jesus one time said, if your eye is single, then your whole body will be full of light. He said, but if your eye is evil, even the light that is in you will be darkness. Kind of interesting because he uses the term single, and then you would expect him to use the word double, but he used the word evil. So I think part of the point here is that seeing evil as an entity in and of itself is like seeing double. I mean, let me just say it like this. The enemy and God are not equal opposing forces. God is still God. I heard somebody one time say that the devil is still God's devil. He doesn't get to operate independently. He doesn't get to operate just willy-nilly. He's still under God's authority. A few examples in the Old Testament. David was being harassed, cursed, and this man Simei, I think his name was, in 2 Samuel, was cursing at David and throwing rocks at him. And some of David's men said, "Do you want me to go and take his head off? I'll just go and shut this guy up right quick." And David said, "Oh no." He said, "Don't do that." He said, "Perhaps the Lord told him to curse me." Wow, that's a strange thought, isn't it? You know, when someone is cursing at me, my first thought is not that God told them to do it. I wouldn't think that. But you know, David was doing something that Jesus said to do. He was seeing through. He was seeing with a single eye. He was seeing God as the real source of all things. Now, the enemy, Satan, definitely causes some havoc. But if you look in the story of Job, you'll see where God actually pointed Job out to the enemy, and he gave him boundaries. You know, and when you can even hear the voice of the enemy in Job's wife, she says, "You still hold fast your integrity? Why don't you curse God and die?" And Job said, "You speak like one of the foolish women." He said, "Shall we accept good from the Lord or good from God and not evil?" See, Job understood the same thing. He understood that he was going to see everything that came into his life as coming to him from God, even though it might be painful and he might not fully understand it. He didn't give any credit to the enemy. As far as we know, he didn't even know if there was an enemy. I mean, we see the story open with Satan having this meeting in heaven with God and the other angels, but we don't have any real knowledge of whether Job even knew there was a Satan. And that's really here nor there, but he did know there was a God, and he knew that ultimately God was in charge, and he carried on. In the New Testament, you see the very cross itself, but Jesus is standing in front of Pilate, being questioned before he's led away to be crucified, and Pilate is puzzled by Jesus. Jesus doesn't really respond to him sometimes. Some of the questions Pilate was asking, he's like, "What, you're going to not say anything?" He said, "Don't you realize that I have the power to release you or the power to have you killed?" And Jesus spoke up then. He told Pilate, he said, "You would have no power at all if it wasn't given to you from above." So you see, the enemy has no power except for what God gives him. And he has a purpose for the enemy, a role for him to play too. The Apostle Paul, in 2 Corinthians 12, I believe it is, he was telling a story about having a thorn in his side, a thorn in his flesh, rather. And he said he called it a messenger of Satan to buffet him. And he came to see that the purpose in this messenger was to keep him from becoming arrogant. He said he prayed 3 times that God would remove this, and God told him his grace was sufficient and that his power was perfected in weakness. So the Apostle Paul said, "Oh, wait a minute, that's deep, and that's a whole new revelation here. I guess I'll just glory in the fact that I'm weak then." Because he started to understand that when he was weak, then God himself was strong in him. So the enemy has a purpose. David saw through the cursing guy and saw that maybe God was the one calling him to do it, so he didn't fight back. Job saw through the accuser that was speaking through his wife and said, "I'm going to accept good and evil as coming from God. I'm not giving credit to anybody else. God has got this thing under control." And Jesus stood before Pilate, and clearly told him he wouldn't have any power if God wasn't allowing it or or giving him the power. So Jesus, the lesson here is that we just continue to entrust ourselves to God, the one real power source in the universe, and we see through all the evil to the good. Romans 8:28 says that God works all things out for the good of those that love him and are called according to his purpose. That pretty much sums it up. So we have to learn to see through evil to God. I hope this helps you. I'll talk to you next time. Thanks.